fast-moving virus, highly infectious, spread through air when you cough or sneeze. There was a lockdown and spread around the world. When I say this, what comes to your mind? Coronavirus? Well, you're not wrong. But this can also describe another major pandemic that happened in the 1900s, the Spanish flu. These are all similarities between coronavirus and the Spanish flu. By the end of this speech, I hope to have informed you about what countries it affected, how it affected people, why it is called the Spanish flu, how many people died, and how it is spread. First, I'll be talking about what countries it affected. It affected most countries in some way or another, even if their country was not infected with the pandemic. People still had to be very cautious. They could not leave their homes. They could not leave the country. They could have lost loved ones to the pandemic. There was no vaccine. Many people had to dig graves for their own family members. Businesses had to shut. The economy crashed, and there were 4 waves of the pandemic, and many more reasons that people could have been affected. Some of the countries that took the hardest hit is Spain, Germany, United Kingdom, and France. There is an estimated death toll of 50 to 100 million deaths, killing 3% of the world's population, where World War I only killed 0.0125% of the world's population. The pandemic infected 500 million people, 1/3 of the world's population, and killed 25 million people in 25 weeks. This means that 400 million people did recover. In Iran, 8 to 22% of the population died. In Indonesia, 1.5 million people were infected, with a population of 30 million. In Tahiti, 13% of the population died in 1 month. Keep in mind the pandemic lasted 12 months. In Western Samoa, 22% of the population died. And in Japan, 25 million people were infected. The pandemic was one of the deadliest in history. It would mainly kill the very young and the very old. And it lasted more than 1 year, with 4 waves of the pandemic. The virus killed more people in 24 weeks than HIV/AIDS did in 24 years. This may give you a small idea of how deadly the pandemic really was. The pandemic was so deadly because of how easily it spread. The outbreak happened at the end of World War I in 1918, when all the soldiers were coming home from war and they would be in overcrowded trains and planes, etc. And that would be where they would get infected, and then they would go home to their families and infect them, and so forth. Also, when a person coughs or sneezes, 500,000 virus particles are spread through the air, and this can infect people who are close to you. The pandemic was called the Spanish flu because during World War I, Spain was a neutral country. So when the pandemic started infecting people, Spain could not say that the deaths that were actually caused by the Spanish flu were just soldiers that had died at war. So they had no choice but to report on the pandemic. So that's why it is called the Spanish flu, because that was the first country to report on it, because they could not cover it up like other countries did. Coming to a close, I'd like to go over a few key points. Most countries were infected in some way. There is an estimated death toll of 50 to 100 million deaths. It is one of the deadliest pandemics in history. It is called the Spanish flu because that's where cases were first reported. We learned that from the Spanish flu the importance of lockdown. Some countries did not go into lockdown, and we saw their case numbers rise severely. This is why we went into lockdown so fast for the coronavirus. And we can thank the Spanish flu for all the lessons we learned about lockdown.